Welcome to Restoration Beyond the Couch, hosted by Dr. Lee Long. In this episode, Dr. Long interviews Michael Menard, best-selling author of The Kite That Couldn't Fly and other May Avenue stories. Michael's memoir recounts his remarkable journey from a challenging childhood filled with poverty and trauma to a life of resilience and hope. As one of 14 siblings, his story is a powerful testament to overcoming adversity. Michael, who co-founded the GenSight Group, a consulting and software company advising major corporations like Coca-Cola and NASA, now focuses on helping others overcome childhood trauma through his writing. Living in Tennessee with his wife, Emily, he is a proud father of 5 daughters and grandfather to 9 grandchildren. Join us as we delve into how Michael's life and work inspire others to find strength in their struggles and hopes for their futures. Your path to mental wellness starts here.
Mike Menard, Lee, live in person. I'm so glad you're here.
Happy to be here, Lee. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So you, such a phenomenal storyteller.
Thank you.
Wrote this amazing book. I will say it's amazing. It's an amazing book called The Kite That Couldn't Fly and Other May Avenue Stories.
Yeah.
So tell our listeners, where was the inspiration behind the book?
Happy to do that. So to put it in a time frame here, I'm 73 now. So we're going to go back here, 73 years. I was born in a small town south of Chicago, Kankakee, Illinois. And I'm the second oldest of 14 children. And we grew up in a tiny house, a 900 square foot home. So just think of 30 foot by 30 foot. It's 16 people at the end.
When I read that in the book, I have to tell you, that blew my mind. I mean, I think about how I like my space and and hearing that you had 10 brothers and
10 boys, 4 girls. So yeah. All the same parents, no twins. As you said earlier, that's 14 pregnancies. Yeah. And when people find out that my mother had 14 children, she would say, "Oh, God bless you." And she says, "He did 14 times." She saw each as a blessing. So some people have large families out of ignorance. My mother loved children, and she, when it came time to end her childbearing years, she had 2 miscarriages in a row, and her doctor finally said, I was in the room with her, and he said, "Mrs. Menard, you have to stop having children. Your body's falling apart." And she said, "He will decide when I stop having children, not you, not me." And he had decided. So, she was an awesome mom. So I was blessed with this angel of a mother who loved us and loved Jesus. And we also had a father who was shaped by his own trauma that introduced, in addition to the poverty, because we were below the poverty line, he exerted classical childhood trauma through physical beatings and the very wrong lessons. He also taught some great lessons. So I want to honor that. So you can imagine the stories that come out of that environment. Yeah. And we had a mother who was so interesting and allowed exploration and openness and believed that we were born to be great children of God. So all the confidence building in the world, but we had a father who suffered from confidence and would oppose my mother, would oppose the good, not intentionally, but it was just he had a frightful childhood, and that's just an example of generational trauma that flows through. So all these stories on my parents' 40th anniversary, we had the idea of each child getting up and telling their favorite childhood story, and it was a hoot. And I remember writing them down on a napkin as my oldest brother started telling the story. So I collected the 14 stories, and I thought, oh, this should be a book. Now that was 30 years ago. So I continued to tell what I have called forever the May Avenue stories. And I focused on the good ones. I focused on the ones that brought smiles to people's faces. But I also started collecting memories from my siblings and myself, but all memories that I was part of. So it's the older group that are included in this book. And so I started collecting the stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and always expanding my stand-up comedy routine with these stories, because it can bring people to tears from joy. It can bring belly laughs, and these are things you just can't make up.
But again, I'm probably going to state this a few times as we talk today. You're a phenomenal storyteller, and I think that you have a way of bringing out aspects of what has occurred. And some of the stories, as you read them in the book, you think, oh my gosh, the one that stands out to me is the mouse mittens, mm-hmm. And because what stands out in there is that your mom was giving you guys the latitude to kill mice in her home.
Yeah. Harvest.
Right.
Harvest
in the freezer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then skin them and then knit or sew together
to make a pelt.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that you are making mittens for yourselves. There's so much through there that you could take so many different viewpoints with that. So many different experiences. Like your vantage point, I guess I should say, could be so different by telling that story. It could be funny because, as you said, that these are mice were like paratroopers at night. And I thought the way that your imagination brought that forth, or the way you told it, was a very imaginative way.
Yeah. So I think from the storytelling aspect, it's something that gets practiced over the years, and you get good at it. Also, it seems to be a family trait. And I don't know if it's because of the conversation level of so many people, or the need to get attention to tell your story so somebody actually listen. I don't know, but I've always enjoyed telling those stories. And then my wife Emily said, when she had a very serious, loving talk with me, to say, you've been threatening about writing this book. I want to encourage you to take it seriously and do this. So I started the next day, and I dedicated the first 4 hours of every day to writing. And I had lots of notes. But I didn't know what the structure was going to be. And, was it going to be, I wanted to tell the good, bad, and the ugly. And I wanted to somehow help the reader, particularly parents, understand that there are characteristics that will build strength and faith and a strong spine that can overcome adversity. So to get help with that, I started, in the middle of that process, I started seeking help and advice from professional mental health experts. So Lee, you were one of those in the middle of the book. I mean, I found you about 3/4 through the way, and you became one of the resources. But you were very different. I talked to 18 therapists, paid for their sessions, multiple sessions, for them to understand my story and for them to decide if they wanted to collaborate to help reflect on these stories so that someone could learn from it. Right. And also find out, why did some of us survive and thrive, and why did some of us stumble? So the reaction was the same from all of them except you. So I continued to talk to you. And also,
I was going to ask, why the 18?
Also I stopped actually when I found Kristen. Kristen is a therapist who I found her profile that she specializes in trauma recovery. She focuses on children. She seemed to have a lot of what I was looking for. So I had 3 or 4 sessions with her. All the other professionals were troubled from my past and wanted to treat me and believed I was suppressing and that I was quite damaged, because they said, what you and your siblings have experienced is complex childhood trauma. And they use that same term across a number of individuals, said complex. Well, I looked it up. Well, it's kind of chronic childhood trauma. If you think of the ACEs scorecard, it's if you have 4 or more ACEs, you are categorized as.
And for clarity, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences.
Yes. So it's a term for childhood trauma. Some call it toxic stress, some call it abuse, but I guess the professional community focuses on ACEs. So when they hear the stories, and the stories of Mouseskin Gloves, which is chapter 2 in the book, it's, I think, a very interesting, loving story about my sister and I, because we wanted gloves. Our hands were cold. Kids in the neighborhood had rabbit fur gloves. We had an idea. We had a mouse-infested house, so let's do it. Well, the therapists, the psychiatrists, the heavy hitters came in and said, let's just unpack that. That wasn't fun. That wasn't happiness. That was desperation. You had nothing else in the freezer, and that's why your mother allowed you to put the frozen mice in there. Can you imagine those 2 young kids working?
So your experience was all the mental health professionals were, their lens was simply negative. You felt like it caused a downward spiral for me. I said, I need to understand what this is. I need to teach myself on what this is. So I read every book I could get my hands on the subject of trauma, recovery, childhood trauma, attachment, by all the names and books I'm sure you've read. But I also found you and Kristen, who I don't think you've met, but she wrote the foreword to my book based on her perspective, and her perspective is very similar to yours. It was, these are beautiful stories of redemption. These are stories that people can learn from. There's the combination of the love of a mother and the teachings and the brutality and the wrong lessons taught by a father, and how those things came together and caused some devastation and destruction, but it also created some beauty. Right.
And maybe this book is part of that beauty. So in this spiral, I was becoming depressed. Here's what I found in the research, all things that and this is your life. But I found that there are 2/3 of the adults in the United States, which I now found is replicable across all countries. 2/3 of the people in the United States, the adults, are suffering from the impact of childhood trauma at some level. And it's a wide spectrum, from the impact to them would be mild agitation, anger, anxiety, all the way to suicide, because they just can't take it. Found that when a child experiences trauma, everything changes. Their brain chemistry changes. Their body gets flooded with cortisol. Is that the right? Yeah, cortisol, and they go into the survival mode, and that constant flood of those hormones can destroy your organs, and that if you
prematurely ages you.
Yeah, it's so heavy. And it still is. And if you have experienced 4 or more ACEs, so as an example, an ACE is you were neglected, you were beaten, you had mental illness in one of the parents, or addictions, and there's 10 of those things called ACEs. If you have 4 or more of those, you will die on average 20 years too early. And
without intervention.
Without a healing. And you think about the travesty of that. And I have I've lost, of the 9 boys, 3 have died, 2 from drug overdoses of heroin, and 1 from early colon cancer that came about when he was 36 years old. And the experts say you don't even need to be tested until you're 50. So I found that brain chemistry changes, which erupts into mental disorders later in life if not treated, and that the body, there's a book, The Body Keeps the Score.
That's right.
Such a great title, is that it causes health destruction and diabetes, obesity, COPD, cancer, heart disease, number 1 killer in the United States, begins from that. So I found this overwhelming sadness. And then I find the prevalence, there's 2/3, that's 200 million people in the United States alone. It's over 2 billion people in the world are suffering. And 40% of them will die 20 years too soon if they don't get treatment. So I went into a funk like I've never experienced in my life before. My loving wife, Emily, gently grabbed me and said, "It's time you get out of that hole. You've dug yourself a hole, Mike. You need to come out. You need to come out." And she was in that encouragement. I got out of the hole, brushed myself off psychologically, and this vision came of my young self, my young Mike, maybe 10 years old, saying, "It's all going to be okay. It's going to be okay." And I wasn't, up until that point, I didn't reflect on my childhood as being bad or troubling. They said, let's go in the house. So young Mike walked me through that May Avenue house, and all the stories came back, and they came back in a much richer way, much more vivid. They were the same stories, but everything was okay. So I rushed to finish that book.
The beauty of what you're describing, young Mike, taking you through and re-experiencing those stories. We walk through a version of this in narrative therapy, where we go back and look at through the eyes of our younger self. We also we look at it through the eyes of our older self as well, watching our younger self experience that. And it gives us perspective, a different perspective.
Yeah.
Because it gives us the ability to look at it as, oh, wait, I was only 10 experiencing that. I put in your case, my 73-year-old eyes on that, thinking I was still experiencing that. And that's where that trauma keeps replaying, right? Because we think it keeps happening to us. But when we experience it as in your case, a 73-year-old man watching a 10-year-old boy go through that, then we have a different perspective on it. And it gives us space to do some really beautiful work.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you really did some beautiful work.
And, that wasn't by accident. I know it was the hand of God. I didn't have a therapist or an expert who could take me through that exercise or that process. It was, I start every writing session with a search for a passage of scripture that will inform my writing for that day. And at that time, the answer, what I heard God saying was, give everyone to me. Give everything to me. So that release, that release gives freedom. And I think there's probably a therapeutic practice that needs to be developed that can replicate what I've gone through with, what did I do? I wanted to write a memoir for my children's sake, but that process of going back in and actually having being escorted through that house by my little self, looking at me and telling me, it's okay. And I even knew then that it was okay. I knew I had to take care of myself. I had to take care of my siblings. And, my dad's teachings, my dad's parenting created badass sons. And that was used for destruction until we found the Lord. I was brought to Jesus by my brother Jamie when I was 19. And fighting and destruction was seen very quickly by us as we come to age and are reborn. But we don't want to hurt people.
Right.
We don't want to hurt people.
Right. Well, that's a thread through every story in your book is you don't want to hurt people. That's not who the Menards were. Yeah. I understand that's who your father taught you all to be, but it's also, it seemed to me that it was a lot of his fear that was about making sure that you never let somebody see you sweat.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that you hit the nail right on the head. And, if you wanted to talk to Dad, the only time you'd get time with Dad is if you're recounting a brutal fight that you just won, or you're asking for help on how to damage somebody. Right. And so that was the only time we talked, was around boxing or fighting.
We know, what we certainly know, every child looks for some sort of acceptance or from their father.
Of course. We're
looking for that.
Of course.
That I call it big bear cub, big bear cub paw. Big bear paw on little bear cub head. We're looking for our father's acceptance. We want their attention. We're looking for that attachment. Yeah. That's a hard theme to weave out of. Is the only way I got any kind of affirmation from him was it had to involve some sort of brutality.
Yeah. Or something that I just put in the category of being wrong. And I used to say bad or evil, but it was just wrong. So, one of the stories in the book is how he had taught me when I was 12 to steal steaks from the restaurant I worked at, so that he and I could have steak when he came off the night shift at midnight. So a couple times a week, he and I were sitting there having our New York strip steak, which we've never tasted before. And I got time with Dad. So that's kind of the genesis of how the book came about. These stories became richer through the visualization of going back. Some healing, I think, even took place. I was sharing all of this with my siblings. And so I wanted to get, as I found the travesty of childhood trauma, the depth, the destruction, I wanted to get this book finished. It's not a self-help. It's a collection of stories that are giving some people insight into their own stories. And I offer reflection at the end of each story. But I wanted to get this book out because I now have an obsession with doing something with the knowledge that I've gained about the destruction of childhood trauma and the prevalence of it. Those two things together, to me, says it's a crisis. It's an epidemic, a pandemic, and that it's silent. There's pockets like your organization that are doing great help for how many people? The people in Fort Worth are around, and now you're reaching out further through messages like this. But it's a huge problem that needs a huge solution.
It is, and it does. Yeah. And I think that what you're sharing is that there's a sense of attachment that's necessary. There's a sense of relationship that is healing, that even beyond the couch, because you worked on the hurt that all of these therapists that you were visiting with, that you were saying, let me just get perspective on this, that they were saying, wait a minute, perspective, but I want to talk to you and make sure you're okay. But that sent you into a position where you were looking at yourself saying, oh my gosh, are there things that I need to consider? And then you walk through your story and you reconnect it to your younger self, which is really critical to that healing process.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah.
So, and I agree. I hope and I pray that everybody listening, that if anybody's been through one adverse childhood experience, that they have the ability, the wherewithal, the collection, the community that they need to walk through that, and that they have the ability to find that. Yeah. That they know how to show up in their own space.
Yeah. I'm hoping that anyone who reads the book or listens to this podcast understands you're not alone. You are not alone. This was not your fault. This happened to you. You may understand it, you may not, but I'm hoping that the book and messages like this will open eyes to the possibility and to understand or seek an understanding of, why do I have relationship problems? Why do I have a obsession with food? What habits do I have that are unhealthy, that are soothing me, that are damaging me, and get to the root of that?
I love what you're saying, that why do I have an obsession with whatever it is that is damaging me? And I hope that our listeners and that we'll all consider that what it's damaging is the sense that it's keeping me away from connection.
Yes.
I'm seeking this over connection.
Yes.
And for some it's work, for some it's food, for some it's sex, for some it's online social media, different things. For some, it may even be this spiritual idea, and they may think it's so great and wonderful, but it keeps them from connecting to a community. And that's, I think, if anybody walks away from this with two things: buy Mike's book, read this book, it's amazing. And number two is that relationship is at the core of healing. It's at the core of healing, and that's what I love about what you bring out in the book. And I'm curious, would you be open to telling us why the title is The Kite That Couldn't Fly?
I would be happy to, because it's my favorite story, and I think it's the richest story. It's got the most to offer, and I'm very proud of that story. So let me try to tell it quickly. So imagine that home, 900 square foot, no money. You learn a very powerful lesson from all of this, is that there is some magic with the combination of scarcity and gratitude.
Say that again. That's brilliant.
Yeah. One of the reflections was that I did without. We had nothing. And there's a magic that happens with the combination of scarcity, meaning the lack of things, and a gracious heart. The Lord loves a thankful heart. If you have gratitude and graciousness, you don't expect much, and you're happy with what you get. So not having was not as disastrous as you would think, because my mother taught gratitude.
Boy, did she. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but boy, did she. And the interesting thing about gratitude is, it's like when I was saying earlier, the lens through which you tell many of your stories could shift the way one experiences it if you tell it through a different lens.
Of course.
You were telling the mitten story through the lens of the gratitude that there were so many mice for y'all to choose from.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were pretty.
And you were going to have these beautiful loves.
Yeah.
You weren't telling it through the lens of, well, they're not rabbits and I don't have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying that you need to put lipstick on something that is horrible. Lipstick on a pig, however you want to say that.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that if you just have gratitude, then it'll fill your belly when you're starving. Right. That's not what either of us are saying. There is a certain perspective that you were taught there was a sense of magic.
Yeah.
That I think plays into your adult life too, but we'll get to that.
So a child, we didn't want for much because we knew it was futile to desire. So you just, it's a bit sad when you say I give up on wanting that, but we learned that longing for things we were not going to get was not productive, was not healthy. So let's be happy with what we have. So I'm going to tell a story about another, the opening chapter is a story called We Have a Light Bulb. And in that 900 square foot home, back then, this is the 50s, the way you got light bulbs is you paid your electric bill. And depending how much money you paid on the light bill, they gave you light bulbs. You couldn't go to the store and buy a light bulb. So because we were always late with our payment on electricity, and some days didn't pay the bill, we didn't get light bulbs, but we always seemed to have one. We were never without a light bulb. But I remember us always having one, and my mom would put that in the center of the kitchen, and that's where we would do our homework on the floor, and that's where we'd eat our meal. And then when it came time to go upstairs to the attic, which was the dormitory, half boys, half girls, she would say, "Okay, gather around," and we'd all get around her like little chickens, and she'd grab her apron, dirty apron, raise up and hot light bulb, And as we were shuffling to the stairs to go upstairs, she would be preaching to us, teaching us, we have a light bulb. Do you know how many children don't have a light bulb? Do you know how lucky we are to have a light bulb? Yeah. We go upstairs and put the light bulb in for the night. Everybody get settled. She'd get the light bulb out and bring it back downstairs for the next day. So learning, she could have said, I wish we had more light bulbs. I wish your father made more money. She could make it like many parents do, but she used it as blessings. And so we are thankful for everything we get. So as a child, I wanted three things. I remember this. I wanted a trophy. Don't know why. Maybe just a recognition of I'm worth something, right? I wanted a baseball glove to play Little League baseball. And I wanted this Black Panther lamp that had a green eyes, jewels as its eyes, that was in the corner window at Kresge's, which ended up being Kmart. So I was bugging my mom, and she finally said, "You want to win a trophy? The grand contest, the great kite contest is next week. Let's build a kite to win a trophy. They give trophies away." Yeah. So at night, I had to cut some lawns to get money to buy crayons. Got a big box of 64 color crayons. She went down to the butcher shop and got butcher paper. My dad made a big frame out of 2x4s. You know right away, if it's built out of 2x4s, it's not going to fly. So she drew a picture of Jacob's ladder, the vision of Jacob's ladder, his dream that showed we do have access to heaven. She was an artist. She did a beautiful job. And as she was drawing this every night, it was her and I, which was a special time. We would only do it after the others were asleep. I would help her and we would talk, and I would be asking her multiple times each night, where are we going to put that trophy? And she'd say, right on the top of the television so that everybody, the neighbors can see it and we can see it. She didn't say, you might not win that trophy. I mean, it was a done deal. I was going to win a trophy. Well, I get to the contest and I try to fly the kite. It won't fly. And I'm a little chubby boy. Now I'm a big chubby boy, but I was a little chubby boy, and I would run and throw. Nothing. And I had visions that I was going to win that trophy, and I was going to actually be flying on top of my kite, holding my trophy. And, kids want to fly. And so I finally resigned myself to the fact that there was not going to be a trophy, because it either had to fly the highest, the most aerobatic, or be the smallest kite that could fly. And I didn't have any of that criteria. So I set my kite up on a tree, and it drew a crowd because of the beauty of the kite. And I was preaching I was talking about Jesus and salvation and the road to heaven. And that must have struck a chord in some people. So when it came time to announce the trophies, I won first prize. And it was a new category for creativity. And it was a 4-foot high trophy. So there's a lot of messages there. There's a paradox. The reason I put it as the title is that, can a kite that doesn't fly win first prize? Most people would say no. Well, it did. Can a boy raised in poverty and with childhood trauma become a successful, God-loving man? Most people would say no, but I am. So it's kind of a symbolism and a paradox of believing in something that generally won't happen.
Yeah. And when I think about, thank you for telling that story. I've heard you tell it a couple of times, and every time I hear it, it's one of my favorites.
Thank you, Lee.
But I think about what you're saying, and how a kite that couldn't fly, how in the world is that going to win the 4-foot trophy? And a young man who grows up in some very traumatic experiences, how does he flourish? Mm. And I think about, one of the things that I'm grateful to you for, that I didn't know I should be grateful to you for 20 years ago, I was really grateful to you and I didn't know you, because you invented the disposable diaper.
Yes.
And I would say that all of us parents who, or any of you who have had to change a diaper and don't use cloth diapers, we're grateful to Mike Menard.
It's a strange thing for being famous for.
But parents all in the U.S. and the world.
But it's all part of the story, right? It's all part of the story.
Yeah. And so, it's like you going from this experience as a child and as a young man, the more that I've thought about this, and thought about your career with Johnson & Johnson, and thought about your career with all of your inventions. I think you said you had 15 patents.
15.
Yeah. And, those are all 15 of them are about ingenuity, to me, when I understood all of your patents, I look at that story again of the mice parachuting down, and you're looking at it. Some people would look at that and say, "We have a mouse-infested house. I hate it. I don't know what to make of it. This is so gross. It's so this. It's so that." You looked at it and said, "There's a problem. I see a solution, and they're going to come together."
Yeah, that's the epicenter of innovation. Mm-hmm. Problem, potential solution or need, and that's the aha moment. So when you grow up in an environment that encourages it, and you get to meet or link up need with opportunity, and you learn to generate those ideas and bring them to life, it's a real gift. It's a real gift. So it has served me well. I also there's that idea was, I would say, a fluke. It came because I was babysitting my youngest brother. I was 17 at the time, and he had a couple of bowel movements that leaked out onto me through the cloth diaper, and I had the idea to make one out of paper towels and flush it, and gave that idea to my dad. Told him the idea. He saw the brilliance. Went to a patent attorney, and we filed a patent memo to secure the idea. Ended up selling that patent, excuse me, or assigning the rights of the patent to Johnson & Johnson. And then they started treating me like I was an inventor, mm-hmm. and started presenting problems, and I would come up with solutions. And if you had resources around you generating, it becomes pretty easy to be a genius, right? You got people supporting you and handing all the legal stuff around patenting. And so it became part of my career and part of my life and part of my testimony. I have the opportunity in my second life, second career, I founded a software company. I still own that company. It also teaches organizations on how to optimize their allocation of resources. But I walk into those boardrooms already a kind of a rock star in the innovation world. So it helps the entree, and it again served the purpose. But
and any parent in that room is you're immediately ingratiated into their world.
Yes,
because you solved a big problem for me that I didn't know that I had.
Yeah,
So that makes a lot of sense. And even in creating the software, there's an inventiveness that you are offering to companies to find, because at the core of the software, your software is finding. How would you describe it?
It is aligning. It is optimizing the allocation of resources to the things that will bring the greatest good based on your strategy. So it's a mouthful, but that's what every executive wants to do. Absolutely. Optimize the allocation of resources to generate the best good. And I am quite confident that all of that coming before me was coming to apply to this next problem that I discovered by writing my memoir, which is what I want to do now is marshal resources and optimize the allocation of those resources to the things that are going to have the greatest impact on healing people from childhood trauma and stopping childhood trauma.
Yes.
The prevention side, go upstream. I think you said, clean the stream, stop the pollution. Right now, the creek is polluted. We have to heal the people that are sick from drinking that water, and we have to clean up the creek so people don't get sick from drinking it.
That's right.
So I think it's a beautiful analogy that you used at that meeting we had a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that there's just a holistic space here that we have to figure out how people can act toward helping heal relationship. We are a divided nation, and we divide on some are arbitrary, some are very meaningful spaces, but even in the meaningful spaces, we can disagree and stay connected. And I think that's the difficulty that we face currently is how do we stay connected even in a disagreement? But it takes an understanding of how we attach. It takes an understanding of how can we stay connected. And I think that, our call to action is let's stand united through helping heal childhood trauma. And I think there's a distinct call to action here.
Yeah. I have this visual of if you could collect all the tears from all the people in the universe and put them into vats, what would you label them? Where are the tears coming from? And what I hear is that if you could label them, it would say a couple of things. I'm alone. It would say unloved, right? And why? How is that happening? How is that happening? And, I've always felt that pull or that pain of humanity, but really couldn't get my arms around it. But now I'm starting to, all because of making the decision to tell my story. And it's not about, well, I hope you enjoy the stories, but it really is about how it transformed my thinking to what's next. So if you can get some benefit and if you can enjoy the book, and I hope you do, that's great. But for me, it's a springboard.
Yes.
And maybe it can be a spearhead to the movement of at least raising awareness to the devastation and the prevalence of childhood trauma.
Yes. There's a quote in your book that I would love for you to read to us about the rumblings that you've experienced.
Yes. Turned right to the page. How did that happen?
We call it the holy flop.
The holy flop. For those of you who are reading along, I'm joking. This is on page 162. our job is not to deny the story, but to defy the ending, to rise strong, recognize our story, and rumble with the truth until we get to a place where we can think, yes, this is what happened. This is my truth, and I will choose how the story ends. So, encouragement to all of you. I think why don't you say how you said it's not about the beginning, it's...
C.S. Lewis has a great quote that is very similar to what you wrote. He said, you cannot go back and change the ending, but you can start right where you are, and you can change the ending.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite things that you wrote. Because we can't do anything about the past. We certainly can decide how we would like to take the present and do our work.
Yeah.
Deal with the hard things.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that one would do that alone. We need community.
Yes.
I desperately need community. We all desperately need community. And as we walk out these things and themes that we have been through in our life, that we would find ourselves a little more whole every time we walk through them.
Yeah.
Yes, we have scars. I had a young man ask me just a few days ago, can I heal from trauma? And I said, yes, you can heal to a point or he said, can I get over my trauma? And I said, you can heal to a point that you're managing the impacts of trauma on you. No, you can never take away the scars. They're always there. But yes, we can get to a point where we manage what we've been through.
Yeah.
And for those of you who, and by the numbers, it's going to be about 65% of the listeners who are suffering from, maybe you don't even know what you're suffering from, but understand that it need not be a life sentence. Healing, the promise of healing is there, and it works. And there's not just one answer to it, but you need to start by stepping over the line to the commitment of healing. And that magic will happen when you step across that line. And you'll find the ways to find the resources and the education and the professionals that can help you heal.
Yes. And this is the message from beyond the couch. You're not imploring people to just find a therapist.
Right.
You're saying, find yourself.
Yeah.
Find yourself.
I'm hearing, prompted by the book, that if you can make the space for a conversation on the topic with someone you trust and love, again, magic begins to happen. It's a release. It's an acknowledgement. And, with someone who you trust and love is very important that it be that person. And if you don't have that person in your life, make that a top priority. It's critical to your well-being and to your healing.
Mike, as always, getting to spend time with you is a treasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee.
Thanks for being on our show, and thank you for writing this book, and thank you for what you've contributed out there. And most importantly, Mike, thank you for your passion. There's so much beauty here that you are bringing to a really dark and painful subject. So thank you.
Yeah, it's all a surprise, but I'm happy to be in this place. Yeah.
If you found value in our discussion and wish to uncover more about the fascinating world of mental wellness, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where Dr. Long will continue to delve into empowering therapies and strategies for mental wellness. Your journey to understanding and embracing mental health is just beginning, and we're excited to have you with us every step of the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and remember to celebrate restored freedom as you uncover it.